AP History students, and welcome to our first session of AP Euroblast. I'll be bringing you a series of presentations on European history. I hope to strike your interest, activate your memory, draw connections, and get you ready for the exam. Today I want to look at task verbs and how important they are to writing the 2020 DBQ for all three history exams this year. The AP History exams use 6 fundamental task verbs in the past, now, and in the future. You've been encountering them all year long on all parts of the exam. Let's take a look. Here they are. You can pause your video if you like, but we're going to go over all of them in a little bit as we look at the 2020 rubric, so I'm just going to read over them quickly. Compare, describe, evaluate, explain, identify, support an argument. Now, let's look at the prompts for all three exams for the past 3 years. I'll read them quickly, but see if you notice something in common as I go through them. For 2019, evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in Indian Ocean in the 16th century, for WAP. Evaluate whether or not the Catholic Church in the 1600s was opposed to new ideas in science, for AP Euro. Evaluate the extent to which the progressive movement fostered political change in the United States from 1890 to 1920, for AP Push. 2018. Evaluate the extent to which railroads affected the process of empire building in Afro-Eurasia between 1860 and 1918, for WAP. Evaluate whether the 30 Years' War was fought primarily for religious or primarily for political reasons, for AP Euro. Evaluate the relative importance of different causes for the expanding role of the United States in the world in the period from 1865 to 1910, for APUSH. For 2017, evaluate the extent to which religious responses to wealth accumulation in Eurasia in the period 600 BCE to 1500 CE differed from state responses to wealth accumulation, for WAP. Evaluate whether or not the Glorious Revolution of 1688 can be considered part of the Enlightenment, for AP Euro. Evaluate the extent of change in ideas about American independence from 1763 to 1783, for APUSH. Chances are that on the 2020 exam, the prompt is going to tell us to evaluate something, so we'd better understand what that means. Evaluate. Judge or determine the significance or importance of information or the quality or accuracy of a claim. In other words, do we agree or disagree with a statement? Chances are that we will neither completely agree nor disagree, so we have to think about the reasons one might have to disagree as well as to agree. To do this, it often helps to rephrase the question, and it is also useful to think about which historical thinking skill we are going to use to organize the essay: comparison, causation, or continuity and change over time. Now, let's do that now with all three prompts, one from each of the history exams. Bismarck, for 2016. So was Bismarck a traditional conservative or a new type of conservative? I'm thinking mostly about comparison because I need to be able to compare him to older conservatives such as Metternich. I'm also thinking about change in continuity over time because Bismarck didn't change completely and become a liberal or a socialist, but he continued to be conservative in at least some ways. We could really organize the essay either way. It depends on what evidence we find in the documents and our outside knowledge. For railroads and empire, I might rephrase this: how did railroads impact empire building in Afro-Eurasia from 1860 to 1918? Here again, we're looking at causation since we're asking about an impact. But what empires are we talking about? European ones or also Asian ones? So we might be looking at comparison as well. It depends on where the documents are going to take us. Now for the 2020 rubric. All right, 10 points instead of 7, with some slight modifications indicated with a green background. Again, you may wish to pause the video here briefly, but we're going to be going over each of these sections and relating them to the task verbs. For the thesis point, again, we're going to have to use evaluate. If we do not, we're not responding to the prompt and we will not earn the point. For contextualization, we have to describe, which means we are citing relevant characteristics. Think names and dates and specific events. But we have to make sure that these characteristics are relevant to the topic. If I'm asked to write about the age of Metternich, for example, discussing the defeat of Napoleon would be very relevant. Mentioning that Napoleon was a short man would not. 3 of our 5 evidence points also ask us to describe. 1 from the documents, the other 2 from beyond the documents. Okay. For the evidence from the documents, note that a quotation is not a description. You must clearly show that you understand which characteristics are important, and a quotation on its own does not show any understanding. Paraphrasing is usually quicker than quoting, and then having to describe as well. For the other two evidence points, we must support an argument with the evidence we have described. We must show how they support the claim we made in the thesis or a paragraph assertion. This leads us to another task verb, explain, which is part of supporting an argument. This task verb is so important it gets its own slide all to itself. There are two types of explain you can do, either explain how or explain why. Make sure you understand them. You need them for two of the evidence points. For the evidence beyond the documents, ideally you would also use explain, but the rubric does not require you to do so. If you can describe one piece of information, again, specific names and dates and events, that is not found in the documents and that is relevant to your argument, you will earn the point. Do it twice and you get 2. Our first 2 of the analysis and reasoning points are for what I like to call the HAP analysis, for historical situation, audience, purpose, and point of view. Note that it's not enough to describe the historical situation, audience, purpose, or point of view of the document or writer. You must explain why they are relevant to your argument. This is why I say that the explain task word is the most important of the 6. It counts for 50% of the 2020 rubric. 2 for evidence, 2 for HAP, and finally 1 for complexity. I'm not going to go over the 5 ways in which you can earn complexity. You can pause the video and read them on your own. But I do want to highlight 2 things. First, explain accounts for 3 of the ways you can earn it. And 2, the complexity needs to run throughout your essay. It must be part of the argument, which is why I've been asking my students all year to introduce a complex idea in the thesis. Now for the big takeaways about this rubric. First, these are the same skills you've been practicing all year. Second, the thesis, contextualization, and complexity points have slightly less weight, 1/10 rather than 1/7. The evidence points have slightly more weight, 1/2 total rather than 3/7. This includes 2 points instead of 1 for outside evidence, and 3 points instead of 2 for using evidence from the documents to support your argument. The HAP analysis is weighted slightly more, 1/5 rather than 1/7. And remember that it's not enough just to identify the historical situation, audience, point of view, or purpose. You must also explain how or why they are relevant to your argument. Know how to explain. 50% of the exam is on it. Evidence, HAP, and complexity. So, know the task verbs and apply them to the DBQ rubric. Please leave your comments and remember to keep learning. Thank you for watching. It's been a blast.